All right, we are preparing the meeting for YouTube. And one thing you should know is there is about a 30-second delay between these. So I'm gonna
between when it starts.
Just between whatever you say to me in the Zoom will take about 30 seconds to broadcast on YouTube.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna keep it on. We have one person watching right now, so we'll just.
Okay, we'll wait maybe another minute to get started.
Yeah, we're still a little bit. We still have about 5 minutes, so. And then once you get started, I'll go ahead and go dark, so that's. You're the star.
Okay.
And like I said before, I'll keep an eye on the chat for you. I will pop in if anything comes up.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna change the view settings so that it's just you. All right, we still don't have any new viewers left, but we still have a few minutes, so
okay.
We can kind of just hang out till then.
Okay.
All right, we have a few more people just trickling in, so I'm gonna suggest we just wait like 2 more minutes.
Okay.
As our virtual art school fills up.
Okay.
Okay, well, it's just after 10 o'clock, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to our first art school live stream, everybody. I'm Angela Olson, the Studio Programs Associate, and Laura Wennstrom is going to lead our very first live stream with some information and a project that you can follow along. I will be monitoring the chat, so if any questions pop up or anything like that, feel free to put them in there and I will pop in and share them with Laura. But Laura, whenever you're ready, go right ahead.
All right. Thank you, Angela. Again, my name is Laura Wennstrom, and I am coming to you from Minneapolis today, and I'm a teaching artist for the Minneapolis Institute of Art. So I'm a practicing artist, but I also get to talk about the wonderful collection of the Art Institute. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about an exhibition that's on view, and then I'm going to be sharing a project with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and start a presentation. And then we will get started. So hopefully you can share my screen, or see my screen. Okay. So again, my name is Laura Wennstrom, and this is our first art school ever. So you'll have to tell us how we're doing. So I'm an artist, and one of the things that I like to do with my own work is I work heavily with textiles, with fabric and found materials. This is a series of sculptures that I made where I covered some existing sculptures using quilted fabric that I had found. I love using found materials, and today we're going to talk about some quilts and some artists that have been very inspiring to me. This is some work that I've made recently using found fabric and various textiles and sewing to create kind of smaller works that hang on the wall. And then we're going to be making paper quilts today, and I wanted to show a paper quilt that I made a few years ago out of security envelopes. Those are the envelopes that you get in the mail that maybe have a blue or black pattern on them to hide what's happening on the inside. I sewed dozens and dozens of those together to make a really big paper quilt. Then it just hung on the wall. It wasn't functional, but that was a project that kind of reminded me of what we'll be doing today. And then this is a quilt that I made recently. It's a twin size quilt, which means it'll go on a single size bed. And it's a pattern called Log Cabin. And we'll talk more about that coming up. but I wanted to show you this. And I used all different kinds of scrap fabric that I had laying around from other projects. Here's a close-up. So you can see it's made from small strips of fabric all sewn together, individual squares. So it's a log cabin pattern. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a new exhibition that's at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and you can actually make an appointment to go see the work in person, or you can see most of the show online if you go to the website. And the exhibition is called In the Presence of Our Ancestors, Southern Perspectives in African American Art. And so this show will be up for most of the year, and it's free to go see. And it's artwork that explores some of the folk art that was made in the South, so the southern part of the United States, by African Americans. And the work I think is really beautiful, and there's lots of really interesting colors and textures in this work, and it talks about the African American experience. And these are just some of the installation views, and you can see more of these on the website if you're interested. So today we're going to talk about these two quilts. And these two quilts are part of, they are from a region in the United States in Alabama called Gee's Bend. And the first quilt was made by a woman named Lottie Mooney in about 1940. And it's made out of just strips of cotton fabric. And she only used a couple of colors. There's kind of a gold color, gray, brown, and black. So it has pretty simple colors, but there's a lot of contrast. And the title of this is a housetop quilt, a 4-block half log cabin variation, which is kind of a technical name, but you can see it has really beautiful geometric shapes. And it exists as a quilt, but almost a little bit like an abstract painting. And this is a close-up of it. You can see it was made by different strips of fabric. And then the artist went back and stitched little tiny stitches over the top, and it creates kind of rows or waves over the surface of the quilt. And then this is the quilt that we're going to be talking about today. And we'll circle back and kind of talk about these some more. This was by an artist named Lola Petway. And it's another kind of housetop variation quilt. And so this artist uses, again, actually, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to ask you about it. So this is the quilt we'll be talking about today. Oh, sorry, my image got a little bit blurry, but Gee's Bend is an area of Alabama that is geographically isolated. It's in Wilcox County. So it's in sort of the southern part of the state. And there's the Alabama River, you can kind of see this blurry gray river creates almost like an island. And this is the town that's called Gee's Bend. And on 3 sides, you can't get to it. And so it was originally, it was a plantation. And so many of the residents there are descendants of, are African Americans, and they're descendants of slaves. And they've lived in this area for a very long time. And they have developed their own unique style of quilting that has become very famous for how beautiful it is. And so some of the women in Gee's Bend are known for making these just beautiful quilts. And they made their quilts using scraps. And they made the quilts because they needed them to keep themselves warm. They lived in kind of old log cabins or that didn't stay very warm in the winter, even though their winters aren't as cold as they are in Minnesota. But they made quilts out of what they had to keep themselves safe and warm. And they developed a very unique style of pattern and color that was passed down from one woman to the next. So maybe your grandmother taught your mother, who would teach you. And the women spent a lot of time quilting, and they became very well known for the beautiful, colorful quilts that they make. Here's one example, and you can see this one, the woman that is standing in front of this quilt, the quilt, the blue color is made out of blue jeans. And so a lot of times they would take their, instead of going to like the fabric store to buy quilt fabric, they might cut up their old clothes. When their clothes would wear out, they would cut up their clothes or sheets and make a quilt out of that. And so like today, women are still quilting in Gee's Bend. It looks a little bit different than it did, 100 years ago, but it's still a tradition that's carrying on today. And so the first step of making a quilt is you sew the strips of fabric together to make a colorful top. It's called piecing the top. And then you add a cotton, like a soft center that will give the quilt warmth. And then there's fabric on the back, and then you quilt. And all of these quilts are hand quilted, which means that one person or sometimes a group of people get together and they make tiny, tiny stitches all over the surface of the quilt. So you can see these three women are working together to quilt. And this would be a time when people get together and they would visit with their friends and they would catch up. And so it became a very important part of the community life. And lots of people still do this. And so, okay, so we're gonna go back after a little more context, and we're gonna look at Lola Petway's quilt. And I want you to talk with the people who you might be with, or just think to yourself. And you can either talk with the people who you're with, or you could write it in the comments, but I want you to ask yourselves, what colors do you see? What shapes do you see? And then maybe what does this quilt remind you of? So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Okay, so hopefully you had some time to really look at it. And this quilt has a pretty simple, it's fairly simple. It has red and green and some yellows and then some white. It doesn't have a lot of colors, and then also some brown. So it only has, 4 or 5 colors. And then when I look at it, I see rectangles. All the shapes in this quilt are rectangles over and over and over again. And then those rectangles together make their own shapes. And so this quilt, when I look at it, it kind of reminds me of looking at a building, looking at maybe windows on the side of a building. And actually the pattern of this quilt is called a housetop quilt. And the idea of it is that you're looking kind of from above at maybe a group of houses at a neighborhood, and you would see the individual houses. And maybe this one even are like red and brown houses against a green house or green grass. So you could imagine that you were a bird looking down. That's one way to look at the design. Some people might say too that it's abstract art. It doesn't have to be a picture of anything. It's just a beautiful collection of colors and shapes. Here's another close-up of this quilt. And I'm pretty sure that this quilt is sewn out of corduroy fabric, which is, you probably would have like pants made out of corduroy. It's a little bit fuzzy and the fabric has little ridges in it, but it would be nice and thick. Again, this was just a close-up of the quilt I made. Oh, okay. So today we're going to learn how to make a log cabin quilt. And I wanted to show you the log cabin and the housetop are actually very similar patterns. It just kind of depends on which colors you use. And so the name of this quilt comes from, this is a picture of a log cabin, comes from the idea of making a real log cabin, which you would lay 2 logs one direction, and then you would lay the other logs the other direction, and then you would build up, up, up to build a house. So that's kind of how this quilt is constructed. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through how to make this project today, and then I'm going to show you, so I'll show you the slides, and then I'll show you, and hopefully you can kind of get started on your work time while we're talking about it. So I'll actually show you 2 different times how to do it, okay? So for this project, what you're gonna need is you're gonna need a scissors. You're gonna need glue. I'm using a glue stick, but you could use liquid glue. And then you're gonna need some paper, preferably colored paper. I have construction paper, but if you didn't have colored paper, you could use some white paper, you could use notebook paper, you could use newspaper, junk mail, magazines, any paper you have lying around at your house. And then, so you're gonna need at least 3, maybe 4 colors of paper. And the first step is to be cutting the paper into strips. So that strips that are about 1 inch thick. So I have already done that. So I've cut my paper into 1 inch thick. It could be a little smaller. And it doesn't really matter how long your pieces are. And then you're also gonna cut a couple squares. You can either cut your strips down into squares, but you just need 3, 4 little squares. And each square will be the center of your log cabin design. So the first step, you're gonna glue down your square on the middle of your paper. And then you're gonna take a different color of paper and you're gonna cut 2 strips and you're gonna sort of measure the edges of that square and you're gonna make an L shape. And you're gonna make an L to go around that square and then you'll glue those down. So I'm just kind of teaching you the pattern and then we'll do it together. So if you can't keep up, don't worry. So then you're gonna do a similar thing. You're gonna take a 3rd color, 2 strips that are the same color, and you're gonna make kind of an upside down L. We're gonna call it a 7. It's not really a 7, but you kind of get the idea. So you're gonna make a square and then you're gonna make an L and you're gonna make a 7. I have a little bit of space showing on my picture here just so you can kind of see the pattern, but in reality, you can put your pieces of paper right next to each other. You're gonna make another L after that, and then you're gonna make another 7. And so this is how you build your log cabin quilt square. So you make an L, and then you make a 7. So you're gonna make probably 3 or 4 of these L's and 7s until your quilt block is maybe 10, 12 inches. It really depends on how big you want your square to be. So once your square is done, you get to make more squares. And so I've made 4 squares, and this is just a picture on my computer. And I rotated them to have a different pattern. So you're gonna make, I would suggest making 4 squares for today's project, but you could do more if you want to. The more squares you have makes a bigger quilt. If we look back at Lola Petway's quilt here, she's made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kind of big squares. And her strips are probably 3 or 4 inches wide. And then she has created sort of a border to go around. And her squares are not perfect. They're not all the same. This is one of the things that distinguishes Gee's Bend quilts, is that the quilters use what's called an improvisational technique. A lot of traditional European quilting would have, like, the better quilt is perfect and everything is square and flat and really perfect. And the Gee's Bend quilts they call them my way quilts. And that means that they're sort of improvisational. So if I'm gonna put down this shape, then I'm gonna choose a shape to go next to it. And you sort of make it up as you go. And there's no mistakes. You just kind of keep going instead of starting over if you think you make a mistake, which I think is really beautiful and makes them so unique. So every person has their own style. Here's another, this is that first one from Lottie Mooney that we looked at. And this is a variation of the log cabin. And so this one, instead of having L's and 7s, only has 7s. If you can see that, there's the square, and then there's a 7 and a 7. And she alternated dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, made a pattern that way. And then she flipped it so that she had 2 I don't know what you would call backwards, upside down 7, but so you can kind of start to see how the pattern of these quilts works. And then I guess the question of how many squares you make, for this quilt that I made 72 squares, and it covers my whole bed, and we're just making a paper quilt and it doesn't have to be that big, but that's just, quilting takes a lot of time. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. And I guess at this point, if anybody has any questions, now would be a good time to ask them in the chat, and I will walk you through how to make it on my own paper now, okay?
Hey Laura, sorry to interrupt you. This is Angela. I'm just letting you know I got a message from YouTube actually that they're having a bug with their chat function, so folks might not be actually able to type in the chat. But if you find yourself with questions, you can always follow up by emailing info@artsmia.org or going to our website. So if there are any burning questions, you can follow up with us there. But I just wanted to let people know that there is a bug happening that YouTube says they're working on. So.
Okay, thank you. So I'll stop saying answer in the chat. You'll just have to talk to the person next to you and invent your own answers. So this is the example that I made of the quilt that we'll be making together that's paper. You can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 quilt squares that I was able to make. And then I'll just show you this one. I have a daughter who's also named Lottie, which is kind of funny that the artist is named Lottie. She made this one, and she's 4 years old, and she just wanted to make pink and purple because those are her favorite colors. And so this is an okay way to do it too. If this patterning gets kind of confusing for you, it's kind of tricky. So if you're younger and you're feeling a little confused, you can do it my way. You can do it your own way, and that is an all right thing to do. One of the cool things about these kind of classes through Mia is that it's not really like school. It's learning, but you're not going to have a grade. And sometimes the best part of art is just doing it, and it doesn't really matter. It's trying something new, and it doesn't matter how it turns out. That's my favorite part of art. Okay, so I'm going to show you, I have a clipboard with a white piece of paper. I'm going to show you how we're going to make our log cabin square together. Okay, so I have my square piece of paper, and I'm using a glue stick, and I'm just going to stick this right on the center like that. Okay, now I'm going to choose my next piece of paper to be my L. I'm going to use yellow. And this is a little bit tricky to figure out, and it's gonna be tricky because I'm trying to hold it up, but to kind of figure out how to measure it, because you're gonna have to cut your squares. So I'm going to just sort of hold it up. And if I was doing this flat, I could maybe use a pencil. Here, I have a pen right here. I could maybe use a pencil to just put a little mark on it to know where I should cut it, like that. That's what I'll do. And I'll just do my first piece, and I'm going to put some glue right next to it, like that, and I'm going to stick on my little piece like that. That's my first part of my L. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to just hold it up like that, and then I'm going to measure it. And now it doesn't matter if you do the downside first or the cross side, it doesn't really matter. You can do what makes sense to you. So now I'm going to cut where I made that little mark, like that, and I'm going to glue it on like that. So now I've done the first few steps. I've made my square and I've made my L. Okay. So now I'm going to go on to making my 7. Not really a 7, but it's going to work for us, right? And I'm going to make it red this time. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kind of hold it up there. And after you do this for a while, you might get better at eyeballing it, and you won't have to, you see what I did? I just made a little mark. You won't have to measure it each time. set it down so I can cut it. And then here, I've got my glue stick. Make my spot. There's the top part of my 7. And then this piece I just cut might be, oh, look at that. It's already the right length. So I'm just going to use that. That worked out pretty nice. And now I'm going to make my L. And if you have your materials ready and you're ready to go, you can just make along with me and you can start working on your own project and you can just ignore me if you want to. Okay, so now I have my first L and I have my first 7. Do you see how that's starting to make a square? And if yours doesn't stay perfectly square, no biggie. Okay, what color should I do next? I am going to use blue. This is my favorite color, by the way. I'm going to mark it like that. And then cut it out. The first part of my L, like that. And then, see, my paper strips I'm having cut off less and less each time. So I'm going to just cut off a little bit right there. Glue it back like this. And so as you go, you'll start to understand the pattern. And the great thing about quilting is it has lots of parts. It's kind of like a puzzle, and it gives you lots of practice. Now, I want to tell you something too. If you were going to make a housetop quilt variation, like the artwork we talked about, instead of doing yellow and red, you would just do yellow and yellow. I'll show you like that. So if you were going to do the housetop quilt, like the artwork we looked at, you could do your L's and your 7s the same color. And then I would take blue and do like that. So do you see how that gives it a different look by just changing your colors? Kind of cool, huh? And you could have lots and lots of colors and make a rainbow crazy quilt, or you could keep it pretty monochromatic. You could keep it just a few colors, dark, light, or I could do green, yellow, blue, green, yellow, blue. So think about what you know about patterns and what you think about colors. And again, you're doing it your own way. Okay, so now I have an L and a 7 and an L. So next comes another 7. So, oops, I should have measured. Okay, I'm going to use this green color. And this strip that I'm using right here is kind of a wonky shape, but that's okay. I guess this time I glued it on and then I trimmed off the edge. That's another way to do it. Okay, like that. And I maybe have one more set of L's and 7s to go. So I'll do that really quick. And if you get your pictures finished, Angela and I would love to see them. So if you are able to, if you finish it, send us a picture of it. You can send it to Angela's email, which I think is teachingartists@artsmia.org. Let me know.
So you can send it to youth programs at artsmia.org, or if you're able to post on Instagram or Facebook, you can tag at artsmia on any social media images that you post, and they'll show up on Mia's website too. But make sure if you need to that you get an adult's permission to do those things. But yeah, you can either tag it online or send us an email.
Yeah, that would be really fun to see it. Okay, so I'm gonna just pretend that I have done enough. And now I'm gonna show you the next step. So the next step is I have my square done. I'm gonna just go ahead and cut it out. And so you might end up using a lot of paper for this, but okay. And if you want to trim your square a little bit, that is a good time to do it. Okay. So now I have my completed quilt block. And what I can do is you can join it up with the other quilt blocks you've made. And then you can just keep adding and adding and adding. Okay, so I'm gonna just glue mine together like this. You might wanna wait until you have 4 done so you can have a really nice arrangement, and how you decide to rotate your block can change the way that the design looks as well. So I'm gonna just glue these together as an example. And it really only matters how it looks on the front. So the back of mine isn't as pretty, but that's okay. Here is my other example of these 4 together. It's actually not very pretty at all on the back. I had to add these 2 pieces of paper to kind of give it a little more support. But I started with one and I kind of ran out of room. So just kind of keep building, and maybe I could even add these 2 together. Oh, but I don't know that I like that because those 2 purples are touching. Do you see that? So maybe I could put this on top like that. Oh, I think that's a better composition. So however you want to do it, you can add your shapes together like that. Okay. I wanted to tell you a little bit more about another event that is coming up at MIA, Family Day. And Angela, do you want to talk about that? Does that make more sense for you to just talk about that?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to talk about Family Day. So Family Day is, our virtual Family Day is coming up in a few weeks. So our virtual Family Day will be Sunday, February 14th. And you can learn more about it by going to artsmia.org. But the exciting thing is that on Saturday and Sunday, so February 13th and February 14th, you can actually visit the museum and get a free tote of activities and materials so you can follow along with all of the virtual activities that are posted on February 14th. So check the website for February 14th and you'll get to see all of the activities that'll be up.
Very nice. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So I guess for the next, I think we've got 15 minutes left. And I was thinking we would have some discussion, but because I can't hear from you because of YouTube, I can just keep working and I can show you some other variations, and we could go like that. Okay. So I'm going to show you, remember how we talked about, let me go back to this one right here. We looked at Lottie Mooney's quilt here. Let me find it. Sorry, making you dizzy. This one. I'll show you how to make this variation of this quilt. Okay, so if you wanted to try this one. And I'm going to just use 2 colors to keep it simple. And this one is actually maybe even an easier quilt to make. So I'll show you this one while you're working. And if you wanted to combine 2 types of squares in one quilt, that's absolutely fine as well. That's how a lot of quilters make quilts. It's called a sampler if you have a little bit of everything. Kind of like you go to a restaurant and you get the mozzarella sticks and the chicken wings and the French fries. You could get a sampler tray. Okay, so I'm going to start with a square, and this time I'm going to kind of start it off to the edge because I'm going to build in this direction. I'm going to make only 7s. So I'm going to go blue and yellow this time. Go ahead and make my 7. And look at, because I've cut up, you can't see my table, but I've cut up so many pieces of paper now, I almost have a little scrap piece that's just the right size to fit in there. Okay, so now I'm going to trim off that edge. like that. So I have my first 7. And next, I'm going to make my next 7. Like so. Stick it on there. Okay, I'm going to put more glue on that time. Like so. Second 7, I'm going to trim this one. You'll have an easier time because you can do it flat. So now I have 1 square and 1 2/7. So I have blue, yellow, blue. What comes next? Yellow. So I'm going to do the top part first. Like that, and cut it off. Like that. And then like that. And maybe I'll do one more blue. Oops, I forgot to trim it. Now, oh no, I've run out of blue strips. So I have a choice. I could either go to a different shade of blue, or I could line up a bunch of blue scraps. Oops, I don't want that green one in there. Like this. I think I might do that. I think that'll work okay. Although this guy's a little bit fat, so I'm going to wide. I'm going to trim it just a little bit. Like so. See, now if you look at it from farther away, you can't even tell. That's one of the things that quilters do, is they make do with lots of pieces of scraps. Actually, while we're sitting here, I'm in my art studio right now, and I do a lot of quilting and sewing, and I have a little bit of something that somebody else has sewed. This is called a hexagon pattern because it's made out of hexagon shapes, and they have used 1, 2, 3, 4 colors of fabric. It has a hole in it. Oops. But I just wanted to show you what the back of the fabric looks like, because today we are gluing paper and we can just put those pieces together. But when you sew fabric, you actually put 2 pieces of fabric together like a sandwich, and then you sew the edge. And when you open it up, you don't see what's called the seam. And so the kind of the ugly part of the fabric that has the back and all the seams and the strings gets covered up with the back, and then you only see the beautiful part. So when you see a quilt with a lot of pieces, somebody has had to sew here, 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 here. Lots of places to get all of the pieces to go together. And so this is sometimes why, and so now people have sewing machines, and a sewing machine goes pretty fast. But people used to have to hand sew, and it would take a long time to just sew an inch or 2 of fabric. And so it's one of the reasons that quilts are considered artwork, is because it takes a lot of time and a lot of skill and a lot of careful decisions to think about what colors am I going to use, what size, what pattern. You're making all the same decisions that maybe a painter would make. You know, a painter is using paint on a canvas, and they're considered artists. And sometimes quilters aren't really considered artists because they're just using fabric. But I think that quilters are artists. Here's my 7. It looks like we've got about 5 more minutes. So maybe I'll show you one more variation while we're going. Okay. This time I'm going to show you what could happen if you use really skinny strips. And we'll do the housetop variation this time. So we'll start with a square. This time I'm going to use purple. And then I'm going to use green. And I'm going to cut my strip in half so it's even skinnier. I'm going to start it with a green, and then I'm going to use orange. Why not? And this is actually a piece of scrap mail that I had that I'm going to just, the back won't show. So I'm going to start by making, oops, I'm going to start with an L. I'm going to start with orange. Okay, trim that. And now, so I have my L, and now I'm going to continue with my 7 using the same color. Like that. I suppose you could get the same effect by having a big square and then gluing a middle square and a small square on the top, but then it wouldn't really be quilting. It would be collage, which is valid as well. A lot of time in quilting, the fabric doesn't overlap. It just fits next to each other. So here we go. I have my L and my 7, and now I have an orange square with a purple center. And next I'm going to go to my next row, and this one is going to be green. And I have my itty bitty green strips. Oh, they're so cute and small. There's one, and here's my other half like that. I'm just going to peel that up and trim it. It's a little harder to work with these tiny strips. They're little. Okay, I have my L, and now I'm going to make my 7. And I'm going to trim it. Let's see if this is long enough. Oh, it's almost, and now I have a little tiny piece. I'm going to cheat it. Just don't tell anyone I'm cheating. Just going to add a little piece right there. Oh, no. See, there we go. Okay, I'm going to now do a different color. I was going to do orange again, but I changed my mind because I'm the artist and I make the rules. I'm going to do blue, but I'm going to go back to skinny. So I'm going to cut my fabric, cut my paper nice and thin. And I'm going to start with my L. There we go. And I'm going to do the bottom part of the L. Oh, that piece isn't quite long, so I'm going to switch to my other piece of paper and do the bottom piece of the L like that. Oh, I cannot wait to see what you guys have made at home. So now I have my L. And it's a little hard to tell. The blue and the purple are different colors, but they do. Sometimes your eyes start to play tricks on you when you have different colors together. Do you see how this blue and this purple are starting to look like different colors? That's kind of amazing. I didn't know that would happen. Or they're starting to look the same. Here, if I put this purple next to the blue, they look a little bit more different, but kind of interesting. Called kind of like an optical illusion. Start talking about color theory. Okay, oops, I have to trim my blue paper a little thinner.
Laura, it's Angela, I just want to give you about a 1-minute warning.
Okay, 1 minute warning. Okay, I'll finish this one. This is like improv art making. I'm gonna have the top of my 7 and then the bottom of my 7. Like that. Ta-da! And so this is the housetop variation. Like so. Okay. And so one of the amazing things about quilts is you don't have to make them all at one time. You can work on it a little bit and then come back to it, and you can work on it a little bit. I like to work on my quilts while I listen to podcasts or sometimes while I watch TV. So it's something, it's kind of like doing a puzzle. You do a little bit and then you come back to it. So that's, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you can work a little bit and then come back to it. Okay, so that's all we have for today. So thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to say thanks, Laura. Thanks for everyone for watching. This video will be archived on YouTube, so feel free to share it with your friends, other educators, other families, so that they can follow along at a later date. But we'll be doing these the first Tuesday of the month. So our next one will be March 2nd with Laura, looking at some other artworks and doing some more projects. So I'll go ahead and end the live stream, but thank you, everyone.